Behind the dazzling spotlights and the incessant flash of cameras that accompany every appearance of the British royal family, a quiet, almost invisible drama is unfolding. Queen Elizabeth II's priceless collection, what the world has long considered an immutable part of the Crown's heritage, is actually already teetering on the edge of catastrophe. This isn't a widely broadcast fact, but it has the potential to shake the very foundations of the monarchy. What if the most celebrated tiaras, symbols of an entire era, one day end up on the auction block, shattered into individual lots like common goods? While headlines trumpet the seamless continuation of tradition, a legal quagmire is brewing behind closed doors, poised to forever alter the fate of these treasures. Today, we'll peel back the layers and explore why the greatest jewelry collection of the 20th century is facing such peril, and who truly holds the keys to its destiny. To grasp the true magnitude of what we stand to lose, we must journey back in time, to an age when this collection was far more than mere adornment. It was a potent weapon of statecraft. The late 19th and early 20th centuries marked the zenith of the British Empire's power. It was a time when the dazzling display of diamonds at a Buckingham Palace ball was every bit as strategic a diplomatic tool as the thunder of gunboats patrolling the South China Sea. Jewels were not merely opulent accessories, but vital instruments, tangible symbols of imperial might. It was against this backdrop that the foundation of the very personal collection we're discussing was laid. And its chief architect was Queen Mary of Teck, grandmother to Elizabeth II. A monarch of iron will and encyclopedic knowledge of gemology, she was more than just a sovereign. She was an indefatigable and at times ruthless accumulator. Mary understood that disparate family heirlooms were one thing, but a systematic, meticulously curated collection was entirely another. It represented capital, history, and crucially, an enduring legacy. Her vision was a stroke of genius, both simple and prescient. The collection was to become an inviolable jewelry trust for the dynasty. Every single acquisition, be it a tiara purchased from impoverished Russian aristocrats or a necklace bestowed by an Indian Maharaja, was immediately catalogued and seamlessly integrated into the overarching design. Queen Mary herself personally supervised the repurposing of antique jewels, commissioning new settings from the esteemed court jewelers, Garrard, transforming brooches into tiara components and crafting complete parures from what appeared to be disparate pieces. The paramount objective was to assemble a treasury whose splendor would outshine any other on earth. This was a calculated exhibition of power designed to resonate for decades. Each jewel gained a meticulous provenance, a documented history of ownership that magnified its intrinsic worth exponentially. From wedding gifts and diplomatic offerings to coveted auction acquisitions, everything coalesced into a singular, magnificent torrent, forging a collection destined to be the enduring emblem of the House of Windsor. It was during Queen Mary's reign that an unwritten yet sacred covenant was forged. The monarch's personal jewels, particularly those of iconic significance, were not to be bequeathed on a whim, but rather transferred via a rigorous dynastic pathway, from one queen consort to the next. This wasn't a mere legal statute, it was an ethical imperative, an ironclad assurance that this magnificent heritage would never leave the palace walls or be fractured into pieces. A foundational principle that operated flawlessly for precisely 100 years, until now. For a moment, let's set aside the intricate legalities and view these treasures through the eyes of gemologists and historians. This isn't merely a collection, it's a living archive, where each gem tells a chapter and every setting chronicles a page, etched with the destinies of generations. To truly grasp the profound loss the world now faces, we must examine these masterpieces up close, almost under a magnifying glass. Take, for example, the Burmese ruby tiara. Crafted by the House of Garrard in 1973, it wasn't a queen's passing fancy, but rather a profound diplomatic and mystical statement. Its creation centered on two wedding gifts, 96 flawless rubies bestowed by the people of Burma, and diamonds from the Nizam of Hyderabad. In Burmese culture, rubies are believed to ward off illness and evil, and their number, 96, corresponded to the number of maladies known to local medicine. The jewelers artfully intertwined these stones into a garland of heraldic Tudor roses, where the fiery hearts of the rubies were encircled by the icy sparkle of diamonds. When Elizabeth wore this tiara, she wasn't merely adorning herself, she was donning symbolic armor, a gift from an entire nation. Or consider perhaps her most personal and recognizable jewel, the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. Its story is touching in its sincerity. In 1893, a committee spearheaded by Lady Eva Greville gathered donations to create a wedding present for the future Queen Mary. Thousands of young women from across the country pooled their savings to present her with this marvel. Its lightweight, almost ethereal design of diamond festoons and lilies on the most delicate frame appeared woven from morning frost. Elizabeth received it as a gift from her grandmother and never parted with it throughout her life, affectionately calling it Granny's tiara. Its silhouette, immortalized on countless portraits, banknotes and coins, became as iconic a symbol of the monarchy as the Queen herself. And what about the sapphire tiara, known as part of King George VI's parure? Its history reads like a detective novel. Elizabeth acquired an antique sapphire necklace in the 1960s, once owned by Princess Louise of Belgium. The stones within it were of incredible purity and color, a deep, almost inky cornflower blue. The Queen personally commissioned the necklace to be transformed into a tiara, perfectly complementing the sapphire set her father had gifted her. This piece stands as direct evidence of her own refined taste and her profound understanding of jewelry's generational continuity. She wasn't just wearing a legacy, she was actively creating it, carrying on the work of her illustrious grandmother. We cannot forget the Russian kokoshnik tiara, a dazzling wall of light composed of nearly 50 diamond rays. A gift to Alexandra of Denmark from her sister, Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia, it became a potent symbol of unbreakable familial bonds that transcended any political storm. Its austere, graphic form was an absolute sensation in its time and remains strikingly relevant even today. Each of these jewels is far from a mass-produced item. It is a singular masterpiece where the patron's vision, the jeweler's genius, and the stone's storied past merge into one. Every faint scratch on the metal, every minute alteration to a setting, every barely perceptible difference in stone shades, these are silent witnesses. Witnesses to hushed conversations in palace corridors, to state dinners that altered the course of history, and to quiet family evenings. The value of these objects has long since ceased to be measured in carats. Instead, it is weighed in the density of historical events they embody. They are the tangible manifestation of time itself. When a young Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1952, the world didn't just witness a new monarch, it witnessed the birth of an icon. Post-war Britain, weary of drabness and restrictions, yearned for a miracle, and the Queen delivered it. Her initial public appearances were not mere outings. They were meticulously orchestrated premieres, where the dynasty's treasures played as central a role as she did herself. It was then, in the mid-20th century, that the collection experienced its first great triumph in a new era, transforming from cherished family heirlooms into a global phenomenon. In Cecil Beaton's official portraits and in newsreel footage, the world witnessed a young woman upon whose slender shoulders rested the immense weight of an entire empire. And that weight was symbolically counterbalanced by the icy fire of diamonds. Granny's tiara on her head didn't appear as mere adornment, but as a light yet robust crown, a symbol of continuity and duty. The enormous Nizam of Hyderabad necklace, a wedding gift, didn't overwhelm her with its massiveness. On the contrary, it underscored her regal bearing and indomitable will. She wore these historical giants with such innate grace, as if they had been custom-made for her. It was a stroke of genius. The jewels became the crowning touch in forging an image designed to inspire both admiration and respect. She didn't just wear them, she engaged in a dialogue with them. For every state visit, for every official reception, a unique, specific jewelry parure was meticulously selected. This was the silent language of diplomacy. The Vladimir tiara, with its pearl drops for one occasion, the austere Russian kokoshnik for another. The entire world watched this wordless spectacle unfold. The contemporary reaction was staggering. Newspapers and magazines on both sides of the Atlantic overflowed with effusive praise. Photographs of the Queen in her tiaras and diamond parures were printed in the millions, becoming a visual anchor of the new Elizabethan era. For Britons, it was a source of immense pride, a reminder that their nation, despite all its challenges, remained a great power. For the rest of the world, it was an enthralling spectacle, a real-life fairy tale. Yet beneath the admiration lay both envy and shrewd political calculation. Leaders of other nations, hosting the British Queen, understood. The brilliance of her jewels represented soft power, a demonstration of stability, wealth, and unshakable traditions that commanded respect. Thus, in the very first years of Elizabeth II's reign, her personal collection ceased to be merely a trove of beautiful objects. It transformed into a legend, an integral part of her mystique, and a potent instrument of national image. Decades passed. The world changed beyond recognition. Empires crumbled and new technologies emerged, but one constant remained: the image of Queen Elizabeth II. And that image was unthinkable without her jewels, which evolved from ceremonial attributes into her second skin. It was during her long 70-year reign that the collection truly experienced its golden age, becoming not merely a symbol of the monarchy, but an extension of the Queen's own personality. Elizabeth II possessed a unique talent for taming jewels. In her hands, even the most monumental treasures never looked like museum exhibits. They lived, breathed, and worked. The main workhorses of her jewelry wardrobe became her triple-strand pearl necklace and countless brooches. These items were her everyday uniform, a sign of constancy in an ever-changing world. The pearls were restrained, elegant, appropriate for any situation. And the brooches were her secret language. It was through them that she conducted her silent dialogue with the world. Each brooch, carefully selected for a particular event, carried a hidden message, understood by those who knew how to read the signs. A small palm leaf brooch, a gift from her parents, worn during a Christmas address amidst the pandemic, symbolized peace and hope. The maple leaf brooch, sparkling on her lapel during visits to Canada, signaled respect for the nation. These jewels were not just accessories. They were silent allies, instruments of the subtle diplomacy she mastered so completely. But the undisputed calling card, the absolute style icon, became, of course, the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. She wore it so frequently and with such affection that the public lovingly nicknamed it Granny's tiara. It's its light, open-work silhouette that's immortalized on millions of banknotes, coins, and postage stamps. It became as recognizable a symbol of the British monarchy as the Tower Bridge or a red double-decker bus. For Elizabeth, this jewel was not merely a component of state protocol, but a living thread connecting her to her beloved grandmother, Queen Mary. She transformed these treasures into a de facto national heritage, if not a legal one. The Vladimir tiara, with its interchangeable emerald or pearl drops, the formidable Russian kokoshnik, the sapphire parure. The world grew accustomed to seeing these on her, and only on her. She became so intimately associated with these pieces that the very notion of them belonging to someone else, or even worse, leaving the family, seemed absurd and sacrilegious. Over 70 years of reign, Elizabeth II transformed her grandmother's collection into something far greater. It was no longer just an assortment of rare stones and metals, but a materialized chronicle of her era. Each piece of jewelry was intrinsically linked to specific events, people, and emotions. They bore witness to her triumphs and crises, silent participants in crucial negotiations and family celebrations. This was their golden age. They were inseparable from the living history their owner created. But behind the flawless facade of centuries-old tradition, a legal time bomb always lurked, and its mechanism detonated on the day of Elizabeth II's passing. To grasp the essence of the impending disaster, we must clearly differentiate between two concepts that the public frequently conflates: the crown jewels and the Queen's personal collection. The crown jewels, St. Edward's crown, the orb, the scepters, are the property of the state. They are inviolable and passed from monarch to monarch. However, the tiaras, necklaces and brooches we are discussing are personal property. And here we arrive at the crucial, carefully hushed secret. Elizabeth II's will has been sealed for at least 90 years. No one, apart from a narrow circle of insiders, knows to whom and under what conditions these treasures were bequeathed. We can only speculate, observing which royal ladies appear in which jewels. And these observations lead to unsettling conclusions. A significant portion of the most iconic jewels, including the Burmese tiara, the sapphire tiara, and even the legendary Russian kokoshnik, now regularly grace Queen Camilla. And this new reality has sparked an ethical and legal conflict that people fear speaking about aloud. For the entire 20th century, the system worked flawlessly because the queens, Alexandra, Mary, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, were direct ancestors of future monarchs in the female line. They passed treasures to their daughters-in-law, who became the next queens and in turn mothers of future kings. But Queen Camilla is not the mother of the heir to the throne, Prince William. She has her own children and grandchildren from her first marriage. Legally, she is under no obligation to bequeath the acquired treasures to the next queen, Catherine. These historic artifacts are now her personal property, and she has every right to leave them to her blood heirs. Just imagine for a moment this headline: "The girls of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, tiara auctioned off at Christie's by Queen Camilla's descendants." This wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a national disgrace, a cultural catastrophe that would strike a blow to the monarchy's reputation far worse than any family squabble. This isn't idle speculation, it's a real, legally unassailable possibility. The beautiful legend of an immutable legacy, passed down through generations, has collided with the harsh reality of modern inheritance law. The unwritten code of honor that held the collection together for 100 years no longer holds sway. And for the first time in history, the shadow of the auctioneer's hammer looms over the most iconic treasures of the British crown. On September 8, 2022, the world stood still. The death of Elizabeth II wasn't merely the end of the longest reign in British history, it was a tectonic shift that concluded an entire era. And while the nation grieved for its monarch, something equally significant was unfolding behind palace doors. The magnificent jewelry collection, which for decades had been one with its owner, became orphaned. The very instant the Queen passed away, her treasures ceased to be living symbols of power and transmuted into a mass of inheritance. A period of uneasy silence descended. The jewels, which the world had grown accustomed to seeing almost daily, vanished. They seemed to recede into the shadows along with their mistress. The will, sealed for 90 years, transformed the fate of each piece into a state secret. This was no boisterous auction with gavel strikes, but a quiet, unseen division. A process devoid of public drama, yet all the more tense for it. These treasures, once part of a national myth, had become subjects of private law. Their future trajectory now determined not by tradition, but by the dry clauses of a legal document. The atmosphere of this farewell was permeated with unarticulated sorrow. An era had ended, one where every jewel had its predictable, universally understood context. The Vladimir tiara on Elizabeth II meant a state banquet. The maple leaf brooch signified a visit to Canada. Now, these pieces were torn from their accustomed environment. They lost their voice, their history, their very soul, which had lived only through their interaction with the Queen. The world wasn't just bidding farewell to a monarch, it was saying goodbye to the integrity of the greatest jewelry chronicle of the 20th century. This was a final and irreversible end. The end of an era when the collection was perceived as something monolithic and eternal. It had been fragmented. Perhaps not yet physically, not sold off piecemeal, but conceptually it was already shattered. From a living organism, it had transformed into a collection of individual, albeit priceless, assets. A chapter spanning 70 years had concluded, its final page turned in absolute silence, shrouded from prying eyes by a veil of palace secrecy. The period of silence and uncertainty couldn't last forever, and its return materialized. But it wasn't a triumphant auction debut, nor a dusty museum display. The rebirth of these treasures unfolded before our very eyes, at official receptions and state banquets. One by one, the iconic jewels of Elizabeth II began to reappear in public, but in a new, unfamiliar context, adorning Queen Camilla. Each such appearance became an event that global media dissected thoroughly. There it was, the sapphire tiara, once worn by Elizabeth during her historic visit to Russia, now sparkling on the new queen. And there was the stately diamond kokoshnik, a gift from a Russian empress, now gracing the brow of Buckingham Palace's new mistress. This wasn't merely the return of precious jewels, it was a public demonstration of succession, not so much of power, but of ownership. Every appearance was a silent yet thunderous declaration, "This is mine now." But the true shock for many came with Queen Camilla's appearance in the Girls of Great Britain and Northern Ireland tiara, that very jewel so inextricably linked with Elizabeth's image that it bore the unofficial moniker Granny's tiara. In that moment, the world finally understood. An era had ended. A piece of jewelry, for almost 70 years, a personal talisman and symbol of one single woman, had transformed into a status attribute passed down through inheritance. And herein lies a fundamental shift in perception. On Elizabeth II, these treasures appeared organic, an extension of her very being. They were a continuation of her story, her personality. We looked at the Queen, and the tiara was merely the final flourish of her ensemble. Now, it's the opposite. We gaze upon the tiara, an historical artifact, and only then upon the wearer. The jewels are no longer background. They have stepped into the foreground, eclipsing their new owner. Their new interpretation is one of a symbol of power and legitimacy, not of a personal history. This emergence onto a new stage is the culmination of their destiny. The historical value of these pieces has reached its absolute peak. The provenance belonged to Queen Elizabeth II is now forever sealed into their history, multiplying their auction value many times over. Their second birth is a triumph, yet a troubling one. With their renewed sparkle, they not only recall a magnificent past, but also illuminate the dangerous crossroads at which their fate now stands. So, where are these treasures now? The answer to that question is both simple and alarming. They are not resting in the armored vaults of the Tower alongside St. Edward's crown. They are not part of a museum collection, accessible for the nation to behold. Their current custodian is Queen Camilla's personal jewelry box. Legally, the majority of Elizabeth II's iconic jewels are today in private ownership, as personal as a pair of shoes or a handbag. The public perception of these items as inalienable crown property is nothing more than a beautiful yet dangerous illusion. Their status has changed forever. From living accessories inextricably linked to the monarch's persona, they have transformed into historical artifacts, into relics. When Queen Camilla wears the sapphire tiara, it's no longer merely a choice of adornment for an evening gown. It's a curatorial gesture, a temporary exhibition of a museum piece of the highest value. The jewels themselves have become more important and more famous than their wearer. They no longer serve their owner, rather she serves their grand history, temporarily acting as their guardian. As for their worth, it has already transcended conventional catalogue estimates. Of course, the weight and purity of the stones, the craftsmanship of the House of Garrard, all account for millions of pounds. But that is merely a fraction of their true price. The primary capital of these treasures is their impeccable and utterly unique provenance. Each one bears the imprint not just of monarchs, but of an entire epoch, culminating in Elizabeth II's 70-year reign. Any auction house in the world would confirm it's one thing to sell an antique tiara and quite another to sell that very tiara of Elizabeth II. That name, that brand, multiplies the value by tens, if not hundreds of times. It is no longer a piece of jewelry, but a cultural phenomenon, a tangible fragment of a magnificent history. And the higher this astronomical price climbs, the stronger the temptation becomes for future heirs, who might be bound neither by blood nor by a sense of duty to the Windsors. So, we return to the question we started with: why has the greatest jewelry collection of the 20th century been, in effect, laid waste? The answer is simple and brutal. It hasn't been physically ravaged. The tiaras and necklaces still gleam at receptions. Rather, it has been conceptually destroyed. That centuries-old chain of succession, that unwritten tradition which was the very soul of this collection, transforming it from a mere assortment of expensive items into an unshakable dynastic fund, has been severed. Queen Mary's brilliant vision, meticulously preserved by Elizabeth II, has fallen victim to modern jurisprudence and the intricate web of family ties. These tiaras and necklaces were never merely a display of wealth. They were the material embodiment of duty, power, and crucially, continuity, an unbreakable thread connecting the past, present, and future of the British monarchy. Each time Elizabeth II wore Granny's tiara, she wasn't just adorning herself, she was affirming her connection to her predecessors and transmitting a silent testament to her descendants. Now, that thread has perilously thinned and perhaps has snapped forever. And therein lies the crucial takeaway. Every diamond in these treasures is not a cold crystal of carbon, but a frozen emotion. It is the indomitable ambition of Mary of Teck, assembling her empire of stones. It is the paternal love of George VI, gifting sapphires to his daughter. It is the unwavering sense of duty of Elizabeth herself, who for 70 years bore not only the weight of the tiaras, but also the weight of the crown. These jewels are the physical embodiment of human passions, grand histories, and quiet dramas that unfolded within palace walls. What awaits them next? Perhaps a sense of historical responsibility will prevail, and future owners, whoever they may be, will find a way to return the relics to the main dynastic line. Or perhaps the loudest auction in history awaits us, when the auctioneer's hammer will finally shatter the magnificent legacy into individual lots, scattering them into private collections around the globe. But even in that scenario, the story will not end. Great jewels are silent witnesses who will outlast us all. They have seen the birth and death of monarchs, the triumphs and falls of empires. Their cold facets hold reflections of events we know only from history books. Metal can be remelted, stones recut, but the legend imprinted in their history cannot be obliterated. Because true masterpieces are immortal, not for their sparkle, but for the stories they continue to tell, even when they are silent.